Welcome to EPG Pathshala. Today we are going to discuss the module Charles Taylor's Epistemology in the paper Epistemology, and this module is written by C.B. George of IIT Bombay. I am Raghuram Raju from University of Hyderabad. One of the important aspects of Charles Taylor is that he is the one who handled both analytical and continental tradition, which was not the case earlier. There used to be people who belonged to the analytical tradition, and there are people who belongs to the continental traditions, and they in fact grew and developed as parallels. Charles Taylor is one of the very few people who is analytically trained but handled continental philosophy with ease and comprehensiveness. In addition to this, he is also one of the most well-known philosophers who is also a public intellectual. He took on various issues in Canada on multiculturalism, on pluralism, and various issues which are related to politics, and cultural aspects of society. So let's look at his epistemological project. Taylor not only rejected Cartesian representationalism, but tried to overcome it. As you all know, that Descartes privileged epistemology over ontology. Knowing is more important to Descartes and not the ontological aspect of it. Epistemology, let us be very clear right in the beginning, is that branch which is about the laying bare the conditions of the possibility of knowledge. Epistemology deals with what makes knowledge possible. How do we know the reality? The ontology, on the other hand, is about the nature of the known objects. Are there prior? What is their status? How do they exist? Do they exist from the beginning, or they came into existence subsequently? These are the various aspects that surround ontology. There is a subject that has knowledge of the objects of the world, is the epistemological project. The objects of the world are dependent on the mind or subject, or are they independent? In representational theory of Descartes, there is a gap between the subject and the object, and the representation mediates these two, namely the subject and the object. There are different forms of representation. One is we represent our ideas. The second one is we represent our sense data, the impressions. The other one is that we represent sentences. But when I speak to you, I'm not speaking about ideas. All that you have is your sentences. Okay? Sentences are all that you have. That is one of the important aspects of representation. There is also correspondence theory of truth, where you say that when I say what I say corresponds to reality, then that is truth. Representation in terms of form and content. And in all these things, what is common to all these things is the inner contribution of knowledge production is separated or neutralized from that of knowledge. What happens in my mind is not important. What is important is how do I represent what I see to the other person. This is representational form of epistemology that pervaded the Cartesian representationalism, and this is what Taylor not only rejects but tries to overcome. Since today epistemology is equated with representationalism, since it is equated with representationalism, Taylor makes a move where he wants to overcome epistemology. That's because epistemology is conventionally equated with representationalism. Suppose if you wanted to overcome representationalism, it tantamounts to overcoming epistemology. That's why Taylor often says that he was trying to overcome epistemology. And then Taylor, in place of representationalism, presents a non-representational theory of knowledge. And let us look at this more, but before that, let us look at what is this modernist idea of representation. The modernist idea of representation should not be taken as that they just report what is there in front of them. No. Now, the other way of looking at to make better sense of representational theory of Descartes is to contrast it with the earlier important philosopher Aristotle. In Aristotle, the notion of knowledge is participational. When I know an object, I am participating in the act of knowledge, in the act of knowing. Now, Descartes will not accept that. Okay, Descartes will not accept it. Aristotle conceived the mind as becoming one with or participating in the idea or form of the objects of thought, rather than depicting the object. So for Aristotle, there is a larger involvement of the subject in the process of knowledge. It is not just merely representing an object as if you are just reporting some fact, like in a monotonous way. No, that is not the point that is associated with Aristotle's standpoint. For Aristotle, as I said, that knowledge means there is an involvement of the subject with the knowledge production. In contrast, for Descartes, knowledge is not just exact correspondence between the knower and the known that leads to knowledge. For Descartes, this is the most important thing that we should remember when we talk about Descartes' rationalism. The method that he offers is unique because for Descartes, the method has to be reliable. That means the method has to generate undeniable certainty or evidence. That's it. It is not just I report what I see. No, what I report is not only what I see, but should be certain and reliable. It is an examination of our own ideas in abstraction from what they represent. So that is the important thing. Certainty and evidence are the hallmark, or in fact the core that constitutes the representational theory of Descartes. This Descartes tries to achieve through formalism and through mathematics. He said that it is not just representing ideas in crude form. It is to represent them through formal structures, which will ensure certainty. Now, this is all fine. But then, what happens to the original project of modernity? What is the original project of modernity? The original project of modernity is to throw out God and bring man into the center, or human being into the center. But in Descartes, the man or the human being who is brought into the center is not an empirical human being, because he is abstracted or she is abstracted from the entire process. It becomes very scientific, it becomes formal, it becomes mathematical. Now, Descartes' project sees that though it is individual centered, the individual that Descartes talks about is not an empirical individual. This, for Taylor, leads to a cultural crisis. It brings a biggest problem to human being on the table. It makes people realize that is this what we asked for when we supported modernity? Because we don't figure it there. Though it is in the name of human being, human-centeredness, human beings don't figure. The empirical human beings don't figure. Because for Descartes, knowledge is disengaged from the world known. It is only by disengaging from the world known we can arrive at certainty. Yes, you succeed in arriving at certainty if you follow Descartes, but the question that Taylor asked in a blunt way is that what happens to the identity of the knower? Yes, as long as the knower is attached to the knowledge production, there is no certainty that is generated. But if certainty is generated, you are just knocking down, you are just eliminating the empirical knower, which is very crucial for Aristotle and also crucial for us. So there is no identity, you are just completely peeling off that identity of which is crucial to human being. Now, it is this peeling off the actual empirical individual that makes the project of modernity in the hands of Descartes reduces it to instrumentality. That I have a knowledge and the knowledge production is objective, but the entire thing is bereft of subjectivity, emotions and things like that. Everything becomes instrumental and mechanical. And the third important aspect that is a fallout of the Cartesian representational theory of knowledge is it leaves you with a very abstract atomic individual who is autonomous but abstract. It is not the empirical individual who is autonomous. It is an abstract individual who is autonomous. So he says that how does this, bring us any celebration for human being? What is the difference between the abstract God and abstract individualism of Descartes in relation to the actual individuals in society? This is the problem that bothered many people, and including Charles Taylor. According to Charles Taylor, modern epistemology conceals the moral and cultural dimensions of the knowing agent. So the knowing agent is not a disengaged person, who is just, it gives you certainty, but does not reveal his subjectivity. The subjectivity of the knowing subject, according to Taylor, is imbricated in the moral and cultural aspects. Moral, social and cultural matrix are very important for him. These non-rational aspects like social, cultural are important for people like Hegel, Heidegger, later Wittgenstein, Merleau-Ponty and Hans Gadamer and others. Similarly, Taylor finds that these non-rational elements which are excluded by Descartes are of predominant importance, have a far-reaching consequences in discussing about human being and the other. Now let us discuss Taylor's proposal for overcoming epistemology. Taylor proposes what is called as the hermeneutical ontology of a thinking agent. That's the most important thing. The agent who is thinking is not just a reporting agent as it is in the representational theory. He is an hermeneutical, or she is an hermeneutical ontological thinking agent. That's the most important thing. And for Taylor, knowledge in its primitive form is non-representational. It's not that you start having knowledge and then represent it. No. For him, it remains non-representational in its primitive form. And human beings are ontologically self-interpreting beings. So that's a point that you should remember, that knowledge is not one-to-one correspondence. It is not that there is something that I see and then I report. No, I don't see just like that. I see it as non-representational, and I also see it as self-interpretative. So I don't see any object in one way only. I see it in various facets. I look at various facets of an object that I see. I might report only one. That's a different matter. I might report only one, or I report one by one. You see the difference? That I can report only one, I can report one by one. That does not mean that I represent in this thing. Okay, I have a pre-reflective, non-representational attitude towards objects. But as I said, I might choose to represent one or one by one. So this pre-representational, this primitive stage is where meanings are imbibed by the self through social practice. What makes this multi-hermeneutical, self-interpretative, different dimensional matrix possible is the social practice, and this social practice is not the place where I plan cognitive awareness. This is not the one where I have a very planned kind of a cognitive awareness. It comes to me naturally, unplanned or pre-planned. Pre-planned is a better word to designate the idea that is there. So this, according to Taylor, involves some interrelated and inseparable aspects of our being. Let us look at them one by one. The first one is that the meaning of things are determined by self-representation. So when I look at a particular thing and the meaning comes to me in the self-representation, I represent to myself, I talk to myself, I have a notion about the object that I see in front of me with me first, okay, and then I live with it. It undergoes, and it might remain unrepresented, and I may choose to represent, I may choose not to represent. So this is the initial stage, is very, very important for Taylor. My identity as a subject who has these meanings is in turn determined not solely by myself. That's a point, that an object might be self-representational, it may be inside, but then that does not solely belong to me. It is not individual specific, okay? It might be something where you have an inarticulate background understanding of the world, which I share with others. So there is this nascent inarticulate background which I share with others. So even though it happens in me, but that which happens in me has already presupposes the sharing with others and the background that we have. And this is also has another aspect which is very important. It has a dialogical aspect, that what I have in a self-representational way, which I know, which has a background, which also I share with others. I can not just share it, I can be in dialogue with others. And the dialogue does not take place between two people in two autonomous individuals abstracted from their social contract. It happens in the social matrix, and it happens between two intersubjectives, human beings in society. So look at the various things that Taylor brings onto the table in order to in order to make the complex aspects of human beings, which are all knocked down by Descartes. That's an important point. It looks as if what Taylor is saying, or even other people like Gadamer, Merleau-Ponty, Heidegger are saying, some of them may look very ordinary. They may look very commonsensical. Yes, language is important, and then society is important, culture is important, tradition is important, pre-reflection is important. But please remember that they are commonsensical. But when you look at these things against the background of Cartesianism, who completely excluded these things, then you'll find how important these people are in trying to bring back these important aspects, human, social and moral aspects, back into philosophy. That's their very important contribution. Okay, so in this task, they do take a lot of things from Aristotle, Plato. That's why they revisit the Greek classics. So that's another point. The other important point that Taylor makes is human beings are language animals. So human existence is self-interpretating. There is sociality and there is language, and they are not optional but constitutive of our being. So this notion of sociality and language are not something that are optional. And you're not a human being and you will say that, no, I will now use language. That's not an optional. That's not something that you choose, you make choice. It is there as part of your personality. A human being already presupposes these kinds of sociality, the morality and cultural embeddedness. The other important aspect that is very crucial to Taylor, with other people like Gadamer and Heidegger and Merleau-Ponty, is the interpretativeness. Okay, human being is a being who is capable of interpretation. More importantly is the next point, that this is a very important point that has certain close resemblances to Kant, but then in a different way. For Taylor, there is a background that for my consciousness, for my being. I don't start with myself. There is a background to my existence, and that background has a past, it has a tradition, it has history, it has society, it has morality. All these things constitute that background. Without that background, I don't exist. Descartes knocks down that background. He says that I exist independent of the background. The background limits me. It imposes certain restrictions on me which do not allow me to become objective. Okay, that entices me. That do not allow me to go ahead with my autonomy. Taylor says, no, without the background, you don't exist. You become merely an idea, and that idea will become too abstract. For him, that background is important. But then here, what is important to remember is, though he talks about a background and makes a case which is more realistic than the representationalism of Descartes, what is important is the world for him is the transcendental condition of knowledge. That it is the world that gives me the background, but it also makes me to go beyond my subjectivity and then transcend myself. So the world is not, that background is not something, again, individual specific, that though entices me, that does not necessarily restrict me. So it is in this sense, for Taylor, Cartesianism and contemporary naturalism are poor, or they look very, very dull, because they don't accept the background. That's the limitation of Descartes and representational theory for Taylor. So a background for Taylor is the transcendental condition that makes the intelligibility of its element possible. The background cannot be completely objectified or cognitively represented, because such a representation will require another presupposed background for its intelligibility. The background is the finite horizon for the limitless possibilities of objective knowledge. So it is in this context, for instance, you find that Taylor offers a holism which is very different from the abstract atomized individualism of Descartes. Taylor offers non-mediational, non-representational and anti-foundational model of knowledge. So this reflective state that I mentioned to you is the place where the self tries to cope with the world, and as I mentioned, that is precognitive understanding. And the important point that we need to add here to what we already covered is that there is a possibility of changing and modifying these precognitive beliefs. The precognitive beliefs, which might constitute the background, they don't have to be taken as final, as limiting cases. They are susceptible for change. They are susceptible for modifying. Take the example of a language, that I may be born with language. But I don't need to live with that language with which are given to me by nature. I can modify. I can learn new languages. I can define my language. Look at what I'm doing now. I am a teacher trained to teach students. Now I'm facing a camera. Now when I face a camera, I don't have to, I cannot do the teaching the way in which I do in the classroom. So now what am I doing now? Now from the classroom kind of a thing, even with limitations, I'm trying to modify my position and then try to present it to a different medium. So these are the capacities that we human beings have. And this aspect of modification and these things eluded the attention of Descartes, who did not accept the precognitive aspects of human existence. But for Taylor, both cognitive and the precognitive are interlinked. Their boundaries are porous. Here, let me just look at the important point that he makes about porous. See that the precognitive aspects are susceptible for change and growth. They can be modified. They also can interact with other backgrounds. So they can transform, they can modify. Now, the pores that Taylor talks about are something like Gadamer's notion of horizon, who also are open-ended, they interact and things like that. So for Taylor, I don't represent objects. I deal with my beliefs and the world. There are beliefs and there are pre-reflective beliefs. The knowledge is not a detached activity. It is imbricated. It is driven by intentionality. So that's the point that he derives from Brentano and Husserl, the intentionality of human being. So because the reason why another reason why he rejects representation is representationalism gives rise to relativism and skepticism. The non-representationalism embodied and embedded, and it copes with the reality. There can be error and prejudices. Taylor says that knowledge, in the knowledge making, it is true that Descartes looks for certainty, and then he will not accept the possibility of error. He rules out the possibility of error. But for Taylor, error and prejudice are facts of life. Okay, there can be error, there can be prejudices, but that should be taken as facts of life and not to be just ignored. What is important is that in our involvement with the world, we might commit errors, we might become prejudices, but then there is also equal possibility where we can correct our prejudices, we can also correct our errors. Okay, so this is the important aspect of Taylor which needs to be factored. So Taylor's account of anti-representationalism is closer to human existence than the Cartesian one. Now, one might ask this question here. Yes, Taylor's account is closer to the reality which is around us, and the Cartesian representational theory is away from the about the actual reality. But the fact of matter is the Cartesian representationalism is very close to technology which we use day in and day out. Okay, so even though Taylor is talking about the of the non-representational form of existence which is closer to our life, but Cartesian representationalism is what determines the scientism and technology that we use every day. So there is but to come back to the prejudices that Taylor talks about, misrepresentation of other culture is possible, and it is due to our prejudice. And Taylor admits this. He says that when there is a misrepresentation of other cultures, we cannot correct that with reference to our own world. Suppose I look at another religion from my religious point of view. Now, if there is a mismatch, I represent the other religion differently, and that cannot be corrected by referring to my religion, but by revising my religion, or by leaving my religion and look at that other religion differently and possibly from their own point of view. So it is this which leads Taylor to cultural pluralism. And cultural pluralism of Taylor need not be anti-realistic, because Taylor says that we can talk to each other. Different cultures, different plural cultures are not isolated. They can talk to each other. There is several aspects of overlapping between two cultures or amongst more than two cultures. So it is possible to move away from our primitive beliefs and then mix with other beliefs and modify our beliefs. And then it is in this context he also says that it is also possible for us to arrive at a universal science. Okay, but then he will not begin with the universal science. He will not begin with the rationalist, that you have to have a universality and objectivity from the beginning. You have to begin with the pre-reflective beliefs, and then maybe over a period of time, either in the life of one's own individual's life or in the life of civilization, there is a possibility to reach a universal science. That is not ruled out by Taylor, but that does not mean that you should start with that universal notion of religion, or what is called, as Thomas Nagel says, as a view from nowhere. So to conclude, one of the important aspects that surrounds Taylor's philosophy of knowledge is that he is the one who talks about the hermeneutics, and then he is the person who moves from the objective notion of knowledge to the hermeneutical notion of knowledge. He is the one who handles both continental philosophy and analytical tradition with same ease. And in addition to that, he is one of the leading public intellectuals and an important philosopher. Thank you.